Hi, it's Rob from the Brush and Boltgun. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to paint Dark Angels. So the first colour we're going to use is Citadel Caliban Green. We're going to use this to paint all of his armour. Now the model has initially been sprayed with Halford's matte black primer, but whatever primer you usually use, that should be fine. Because we're going for quite a dark green on these, and the Caliban Green is quite dark, but the black undercoat would probably be better than maybe like Death Guard Green or something similar to that. So you just want to get a nice smooth Caliban Green layer on there. And once you've got his armour all covered with that, we can move on to the next colour. So the next colour is going to be Citadel Khorne Flesh Tone. I'm just going to use this to paint his head. Obviously you don't have to do it this colour. There's a load of different colours that you can do the skin on the miniatures, so whichever colour you're doing it, use the skin tone for that now. You'll notice on the back there, it looks like the helmet is still black and not been painted green, so if you give that a coating of Caliban Green too, because that's going to be the same colour as the rest of his armour. Now we're moving on to Citadel Mephiston Red. We're going to use this to do the casing for his bolt rifle. So give that a nice smooth coat of Mephiston Red. I do like that the bolters are red for these guys. A bit of a throwback to the old days when they had coloured bolters. So I do like that. Makes a change from painting them black as well. So once that's sorted, we can move on to the next colour. I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Khorne Red. I'm going to use this to do the purity seals. He's got one on each leg, and also the lanyard that he's got going across his shoulder. Once you've finished them, it's on to the next colour, which is Citadel Mournfang Brown. I'm going to use this to do his belt and the pouches on his belt. Also should mention that we are doing the eye lenses on his helmet with Mephiston Red as well. So didn't mention that earlier, so if you haven't done it yet, just paint those eye lenses with Mephiston Red. Next we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Rakarth flesh. I'm going to use this to do the parchment on the purity seals, also his chest eagle, the bones inside that little box thing that he's got hanging from his belt. Also the scroll which is on his bolt rifle. Next up, it's Citadel Retributor armour. Got a little bit of gold to him, so we're going to do the ammunition in the magazine for his bolt rifle. Also going to do the little box hanging from his belt and the skull on his helmet. Give these a nice smooth coat of Retributor armour. You can move on to the next colours. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Vallejo Black. I'm going to use this to do all the seals and the bits between the armour plates on his power armour. So just give them a nice smooth coat of black. Depending on how careful you are when you're applying the rest of the colours and the highlights, depends on whether or not you can just highlight them later on. If not, we're going to do a layer of black on them a bit later on too. So if you don't want to do one now, you could always leave it and just do it later on when we're touching it up. I'm going to use some Vallejo Modeler Chrome. I'm going to use this to do all the metallic bits that are remaining, so the main body and working parts of his bolt rifle. Slightly out of focus there. You've got the little bits that go around the back of his head. I think I initially missed those, but if you do those bits too. You also want to do those two little tubes on the front of his helmet too. Do love this colour because it's so easy to apply. It's really smooth, really thin, but it's got loads of pigment, so it spreads very easy. Now we're going on to the shades, so we're going to use Citadel Seraphim Sepia, and I've already used it here because the camera didn't record. Probably pressed the button the wrong way. So just add Seraphim Sepia to all the bits that you used Rakarth flesh on. Now we're going to use some Citadel Nuln Oil Gloss. I'm going to use this to paint his bolt rifle, or the metallic parts on the bolt rifle I should say. You don't want to be painting the red with this, just the metallic parts. Also you want to be painting the metallic parts on his power pack, and also the two tubes on the helmet. If you don't have the Nuln Oil Gloss, the normal Nuln Oil just works as well. It's what I've used for years and still use on my Lamenters now, is just the normal Nuln Oil, so either or will do. Next up we're going to use some Citadel Agraxair shade. We're going to use this to do the gold that we've added to him. So you've got the little quill and the skull on his shoulder, the rounds in his boat rifle, the little box thing on his hip, and the skull on his helm too. Like so. Now it's going to be a little bit of Citadel Carroburg Crimson. I'm going to use this to do the purity seals. You can just give these a quick going over. Do the lanyard as well. Also while you've got it out, you can also use the Carroburg Crimson to do the inside of his mouth as well. I'll just give it a bit of darkness inside there. Use a tiny bit of, I think it was the Mephiston Red that I used in there, so a little bit of Carroburg Crimson will sort that out. Now I'm just going to do the casing of the bolt rifle, so where you've painted the Mephiston Red on his rifle and also the eye lenses for his helmet. You're just going to use a little bit of Druchii Violet to get that shade in there. Just saying here about the eye lenses, remembering to paint them because I'd failed to paint them on my one. So now we're going to use some normal Citadel Nuln Oil, and we're going to use this to paint up the pouches and his belt, and also the sling for his rifle. Next up, Rifle Flesh Shade. I'm just going to do his face with that. Give that a coating so you can see all the details on there. You don't want it so it fills the kind of eye socket areas, just enough so that you can see the details and you can see his eyes and his eyelids. Like so. And the final one we're going to use is Citadel Nuln Oil once more. I'm going to use this to shade his armour. I do like the Dark Angels to be a very dark green. I don't like the highlights to be too bright on them. Kind of like the dark green that they had on the cover of one of the old Epic Space Marine games. I think it was a piece of art by Jim Burns. It's a cracking piece of artwork, but the very dark green that they had there is how I always think of the Dark Angels. So now we're going to start applying colour back to his armour. I'm going to start with Citadel Caliban Green. Just want to be painting this on. You want to leave shade underneath the legs and on the underside of the arms, anywhere that's not going to be getting any light. Giving a nice smooth coat of this for everywhere else that will be catching the light. Lots of great details on the Primaris armour, I really do like it. After years of playing the normal fellas and painting up loads of them, it's nice to have a go at some different armour for them. So now we've added Citadel Waaagh flesh to the Caliban green just to lighten that up a bit, and we're going to do the first highlight on that. We're going to use it to highlight about 50% of the area that we covered with Caliban green. So it's probably about a mix of about 50-50 in terms of the Waaagh flesh to Caliban green. But just when you're mixing it, just get it to a green that you like. It doesn't have to be a specific 50-50 or anything like that. Just whatever green you think highlights it well, go with that. So now we're going to add some Citadel Warboss green to the previous mix, and we're just going to use this to highlight the armour. Now this is mainly going to be an edge highlight. There's not going to be too much actual painting on of this. Just go around the edges of the armour that will be catching the light. Parts of the breastplate as well there, just to make those details stand out. The Warboss green adds just a nice little brightness to the previous mix and just makes these edges really stand out, but it's quite a subtle highlight to them, so it's not obvious, it's not overly bright, but it does bring out the edges and make them more noticeable. So now we're going to start working on his skin, so we're going to go back to Citadel Khorne flesh tone. We're just going to start painting on the details for this, giving this a nice cover back, leaving areas sort of like the shade of his cheekbone and stuff like that, leaving those with the shading, and in the recesses around his mouth and his nose and his eyes, and just pick out the details around the rest of the head. You can see doing this, you're just using downward strokes, and that always gives you the best point when you're working on them. Now we're just going to mix some Vallejo white with the Khorne flesh tone to lighten that up. We're going to start highlighting the skin. Again, only dragging the brush downwards so that you can keep that point. Pick out all the details. I'm using an Army Painter Wargamer character brush here. I love the point on it. Really, really good brush. If you look after them, they last for ages as well, which is nice. Once you've finished this layer of highlights, we're going to move on to the next layer. So we're going to mix a little bit more Vallejo white with the previous mix. We're just going to do one final highlight on his skin here. It's more of an extreme highlight, so you're now picking out the raised areas on all the details rather than doing large areas with it. Just getting them to stand out, so you want to try and get like the crow's feet at the edge of his eyes, the wrinkles on his forehead, the creases down his face and that kind of thing. Just try and highlight the top edges of all of those areas. Now we're going to use Citadel Retributor armour, and we're going to start reapplying the gold back to all the little pieces of that. So you can apply this to most areas except for, I'd say, the undersides. So you're not going to be painting like the underside of that Aquila or the underside of the little box on his hip, just because there'd be no light getting there, and the shade will have dulled down the gold that was there originally. So you'll still be able to see the gold, but it will look like it's shaded. So once you've got a nice smooth layer of Retributor armour on there, we can move on to the highlights. So we're first going to use Citadel Liberator Gold. I'm going to highlight these areas with this. Again, think about where the light's coming from. You're going to be highlighting the top edges and only the areas that are going to be catching the light if it's coming down from above. Like so. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of Vallejo Modeler Silver with the Liberator Gold. I'm just going to use this to do extreme highlights on the gold, so you're going to be using it to do the tips of the little studs on the sides of the box, around the edges and the corners. Just notice that there's a little bit of a sprue where it joins onto it there, so just cut that off and then reapply the shades and the highlights. Then again up here you're just highlighting it, going onto the tips of the details and the edges that be catching the most light. With that finished, we're now going to go onto Vallejo White, and we're going to paint his eyes and his teeth. So again, as usual, you're dragging the brush away from the point. So always drag from the nose outwards when you're going to paint the eyes. Just makes it a lot easier. If you're trying to paint it straight on, your brush will splay. The same with the teeth. You want to be dragging the brush for the top teeth. You want to be dragging it from the top of the tooth downwards, and for the bottom teeth you want to be dragging it from the bottom of the tooth towards the top teeth, but have the model upside down so that you're dragging it away from the gums, and that way it gives you that nice smooth line on each tooth to whiten it, and also holds the point. So I'm just going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel Khorne Crimson, and I'm just going to use this because I put a little bit of extra white onto his lip there, like his lip stroke gum. I'm using the Khorne Crimson to darken that down so you can't see it anymore. So using a little bit of Vallejo Black, I'm just going to put a pupil in each eye. Now the pupil in the left eye's had a pretty nasty scrape going down it. So whereas I try and put the pupil on it, I end up just going over that with a bit of blood for the blood god and a bit, so you can leave this scraped eye if you want to. You don't have to, you can paint the pupil on there. I've seen a few people do it sort of like as though it's kind of blind, and it's got that kind of almost cataracty look to it. But here I'm just going to use a bit of blood for the blood god and do that straight down the wound to his face there, and that's going to go through his eye as well. Like so. Now we're going to use a tiny little bit of Vallejo Modeler Silver. I'm just going to pick out the two studs on his head. I used the wrong brush here and got a little bit of the silver on his skin as well, so I'm just wiping that away with a different brush. But you just want to get a little tiny bit of silver on each of those studs on his head. Make them stand out. Now I'm going to use a tiny little bit of Citadel Khorne Crimson to go around each of those studs. That just gives the impression that it's not quite a nice smooth healed wound. It is still a bit delicate there, where maybe the skin's trying to fight the implants or something. Either way, I just like to look at the way it looks with the bit of red around the studs. Now we're going to start highlighting the bone colours. I'm going to use Citadel Rakarth Flesh to start working and reapplying the colour on the chest eagle, and also the bones and the knee pad. Now I end up doing him 6th company, so his left knee pad, I start quartering it, but I actually change that a little bit later on. I'm actually going to half it later on, so depending on what company you want to do it, do the company markings on the left knee. I'm going to be doing him 6th company, so he's going to have half in green and half in a kind of cream kind of colour, but you'll see that a bit later on. So we're going to add a little bit of white to the Rakarth Flesh, and we're going to start highlighting the chest eagle and the knee pad and the parchments from the purity seals. You can see here where I've quartered that knee pad. If you are following this guide, don't do the knee like that. As you're looking at the front of the model, the inside of the knee pad that we've painted beige there is going to be beige, like the inside half of it, and the outside half of it is going to be the same colour as the rest of his armour, so you're going to start that with Caliban green. But that is just specifically for the company marking, so depending on what company you're going to do it, depends on that. So adding a little bit more white to the Rakarth Flesh, We're going to highlight the knee pad that we are going to change. I'm going to highlight the purity seals. Like so. Next up, we're going to use Rakarth flesh and Ushabti bone. We're going to use this to start painting on the Aquila, because we want to lighten this up and get it a bit more bone coloured. I do think this bone coloured chest eagle really goes well with the green of the armour. It's a really nice colour, the Dark Angel. I do like them. Now I'm going to add a bit more Ushabti bone to the previous mix and continue highlighting that. This one's going to be more an extreme highlight, so you're going to be thinking about doing the tips of the kind of feathers, the top edges of like the top of the wing. If you can get any of the bottom edges of the feathers as well, that looks really, really good if you can get the line going across them. And then also the areas of the skull that are going to be catching the light, the raised areas of that skull, that is. So that done, we're now going to move on to Citadel Mephiston Red, and we're going to start recolouring the bolt rifle. So all you're doing here is making sure that there's a little bit of Druchii Violet around the edges where it joins onto the details, and just paint the rest of it with a nice smooth, flat Mephiston Red colour. Now we're going to highlight the red on his bolt rifle. We're going to use Citadel Evil Sunz Scarlet, which I don't show here, but we are highlighting with Evil Sunz Scarlet. Gives it a nice kind of orangey red colour. It's the one that I use to highlight Blood Angels and chapters like that, because it just does give a really, really nice orange tint to the red, I think. Never used it on the Evil Sunz though, because I don't actually think I've ever painted any. Now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Squig Orange. I'm going to use this to highlight the red on the bolt rifle. So you're mainly going to be doing the edges and the corners, just around any little details like that, where the light would be catching them. Like so. Once you've finished that, we're now going to move on to Citadel Khorne Red. We're going to start working on the purity seals and the lanyard. So you're going to pick out each individual sort of like piece of cord on the lanyard. Give that a nice coat of Khorne Red, making sure that you leave the Carrowbird Crimson in the recesses there. And also when you're highlighting the purity seals, the wax parts, you just want to make sure that you're leaving shade on the underside of any of the red bits that you're doing, and shade in the recesses where it's got those little details on the wax parts. So with that done, we're now going to use a little bit of Citadel Wazdakka Red. We're just going to highlight the lanyard and highlight those purity seals. Again, you're doing almost exactly the same as you did with the previous layer on the lanyard. Slightly out of focus there, not too sure what it's focusing on. And also on the purity seals, you just want to be picking out the top sides and the top edges where the light will be catching. And the final highlight for this, we're going to use a little bit of Citadel Pink Horror. I'm just going to do the tiniest little highlights on each of these things. Obviously only highlighting these on the top edges and the bits that will be catching a light. You don't want to highlight the whole thing with this or it'll just make the whole lanyard pink. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the colour that we're going for here. Like so. Now we're going to go on to the pouches. We're going to use Citadel Mournfang Brown. I'm going to highlight, or rather reapply, the Mournfang Brown to the belt and the pouches and the sling. You're making sure that you're leaving some of that Nuln Oil in the recesses and on the undersides of them, giving it that darkness and that shade. Like so. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of Citadel Rakarth flesh with the Mournfang Brown. I'm just going to roughly highlight around the edges and areas where it would be scuffed. So you're not doing a smooth highlight here, you want it to be quite jagged, so if it's a horizontal edge you want to be going up and down with the motions of the brush. If it's a vertical edge you want to be going side to side to give that a rough texture to it. You don't want those to be smooth highlights, because you want it to look like the leather's been worn and scraped as it's been used. So now I'm going to use a little bit of Citadel Rakarth flesh mixed with the previous mix and just do one final highlight on these leather pouches and the belt. Like so. Those done, we're now going to work on the lenses for the helmet using a little bit of Citadel Mephiston Red. So you're going to reapply that to the whole end lens and leave the Druchii Violet in the recesses around the edge of that lens. That'll give you a good basis to start highlighting the lenses. Now I'm mixing some white with the Mephiston Red. We're just going to highlight the lower back end of both of the lenses. Now adding a little bit more white to the previous mix. We're going to do the same again, but we're going to add a smaller highlight to that area that we just highlighted. Like so. I'm going to add a little bit more white to the previous mix. And just do one final little highlight before we put the pure white on. There's only going to be a really small one, this. To the very back end of that last highlight. Like so. Now I'm just going to use some pure Vallejo white. Just to put a spot at the front of each lens. Then a tiny thin highlight where we've been doing those highlights at the back there. Like so. Next we're going to use some Vallejo black. We're going to redo the seals on the armour, between all the armour plates. We're also going to do the text on the purity seals too. So with the purity seals you're just doing horizontal lines going all the way down the purity seal to represent little lines of text. When you can finally get the paint to work on the brush, that is. like so. And once you finish the text on these, just put the black on those seals once more, just to make sure they haven't got any green or any other colours on. Then we can move on to the next layer. So next up we're going to use some Vallejo German Grey. We're going to be using this to highlight all of the seals on the armour. So we're just going to put the German Grey across each of these, on the crests of all these ridges, just to make that look like dulled kind of rubber. And once you've done that, we can move on to the next colour. So now we're going to start painting on the Dark Angel's chapter icon. So there's going to be a full video of this coming up on Sunday, just so that we can have the full thing of this, because it does take a little bit of time. Basically you're painting that downward arrow. It's basically a case of painting up the dagger first and then painting the wings on either side afterwards. Today I will cover this in a video on Sunday, the full video. So once you've got the rough outline done of the badge, you're then going to use a little bit of Caliban green just to straighten off the edges and make everything the right shape. Then you're just going to use this to put the gaps between the feathers on the wings. Now, as there is 4 kind of feathers on it, I always find it easiest to put the gap near the top one, the gap near the bottom one, and then put the one in the middle finally, and then you can just work out the sizes and the shapes of what they're meant to be from there. So working on the battle line markings on his other shoulder pad now. This is basically just a side to side arrow with an arrowhead on each end of it. So you start by painting the red rectangle in the middle, then paint the arrowhead on either side, and then from there you can paint the number on the top. This is going to be another tutorial for another Sunday of showing how to do this start to finish. We'll get the general idea once you see the picture of it. So the arrow's done. It's time to add the number, and for this we're going to use some Vallejo white. I'm just going to copy the first one that was in the picture of the chapter iconography, I presume from a codex of some sort, and it's the number 3. So we're just going to paint this on here. If you'd like to see videos of how to paint the numerals, like easy ways to paint the numerals and things like that, just shout out, because they'll be pretty easy to do. You should be able to hammer some of that out and just pop them up as extra videos during the week. And that is the finished Dark Angel. Really happy with how he turned out. The greens are nice and dark, quite subtle highlights on the greens, and then all the little details and stuff like that. Really happy with how he turned out. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future content. Also, think about subscribing to some of our other social media linked below. Thanks very much. If you like the channel and enjoy the content and you'd like to support us, feel free to head to our coffee page linked below, where you can buy us a brew. Thanks very much.